to Sayard to begin your presentation. Go ahead, Sayard.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Just making sure everyone can hear. I know I was on a few Zooms this morning and usually things worked, though we know technology. It doesn't always do exactly what we want. So here we go. I think I'm sharing the part of my screen I would like. Today's topic is one that I think is very powerful and very important within the field of assistive technology. We can do a lot to research tools. We can be on the cutting edge and know all of the new tools that are out there. However, what do we do once we get them? If we get that great communication device or that really cool reading pen and it's just ending up on a shelf, then we're not really doing our full due diligence. So to me, adoption or abandonment of a tool is something that we definitely have to take into consideration as we are making our decisions. So just to start out, I like to just quickly introduce myself, just shameless self-promotion. I'm obligated to put a picture of my child in every presentation I do. There he is. I work just outside of Chicago for Southwest Cooperative in the south part of Cook County. And I am also an adjunct faculty member at UIC in their Assistive Technology Certificate Program. And we're also working on a project with the Great Lakes ADA on quality indicators of assistive technology post-secondary. So if any of that sounds cool, feel free to email. I always love to discuss assistive technology and how we can improve outcomes for our students. So to launch, we have to understand these big A's, adoption and abandonment. There actually has been a lot of work, a lot of research, a lot of thought put into this already that we can review. First, there is the quality indicators of assistive technology, and we'll review that, and the area of implementation, the concepts of abandonment and adoption, and what evidence has been gathered as to what can help promote or detract from those. And how really deciding whether a student will use or not use a device really starts in the consideration and feature matching process. How to create good implementation plans, collecting data to make sure we made the right decision, and always remembering that assistive technology is a cycle. It's never a one and done, here's your box, have fun being accommodated. So just to start today, I know we had a quick poll. Just like to kind of know who is with us here on the call. So I launched the poll. If everyone could just take a second to vote. Okay. Got about half the votes in. I'll give it another second or two. Okay, awesome. Looks like that's leveling out. So I will share that with everybody. It looks like we have a vast number of assistive tech specialists here. I love that we have some paraprofessionals and family members as well, because they are a very important part of this dynamic. And also therapists, special educators, and teachers. This is almost the quadrifecta of the people that we need to make this work. So thank you everyone for letting me know that. Okay. So as we move in, one of the first places I always like to start with big AT problems is the quality indicators of assistive technology. If you haven't looked at these before, they are 8 areas that just show what best practices in assistive technology can look like. I always find this to either be a place I find a good answer or a place that gives me a wonderful jumping off or starting off point. You can find this for free on their website, which I have listed within the presentation. One of these indicators is implementation. So they define it as the ways assistive technology devices and services, as included in the IEP, are delivered and integrated into the student's educational program. Now, integrated, I think, is a very key word, because it's not that we're handing them the computer and it's layered on top of their lesson. It should be something that's used within it. Some of the things they use to demonstrate what a good implementation plan looks like is that it's collaborative, that integrated, that it's shared, that there's a variety of strategies. It's not just one way to do it, that there are opportunities for the student and the team to learn, that there is data collection going on, and that we have a plan for managing equipment, because as we've all definitely found out over the last 9 months, what I like to call the first rule of technology: it breaks. It doesn't always work. So we need to have plans for that. So going in, when we're writing up a plan of how to use AT, the quiet PS, or the quality indicators of assistive technology, just the quiet, do give us some hints as to what some of the common errors people make when we're jumping into it. This first one I find to be very common when I talk to teams is everyone kind of thought they knew what was going on, but when you bring everybody to the table, it turns out that there are gaps that everyone thought somebody else was taking care of. One person might be in charge of all of it. And as an assistive technology coordinator myself, sometimes that's expected to be me. But I'm over such a large area, there's 66 different schools where that could be me, and you don't want to split me up that far. So definitely we need to make sure that multiple people on the team know what's going on. Also acquisition. If you have one laying around in a closet, it's so tempting, no matter what the device, to say, hey, let's try this with the student. And it's fine to try it, but we don't necessarily want to just match a student by what's already available. We want to make sure it works with instruction. I've started putting in evaluations that this is my recommendation for the type of tool. Here's some brand names. However, talk to your instructional tech people and your IT people before implementing this, because we want to make sure it works within the school and that there are contingencies for when things break. These next two slides are very text heavy. You can find this on their website, qiat.org. These are the indicators. They're all freely available. You can go through with your team and say, okay, where are we here? If I look at indicator number 1 about implementation, what does it look like when our team does an implementation plan? And I really like these descriptions. And I've also found that when going through this type of survey, doing it multiple times or having multiple team members feel like they can do it individually and come back and share their results often gives you better or more truthful results, because one person might think, oh yeah, we've got this down, but another person says, I'm not really on the same page. So these underlined statements here are some of the things in the indicators, going all the way down to 7. So if your team is doing a kind of let's come down to basics and find out what we can do to make sure students are using their tools, I think that the implementation indicator is a great place and a great tool to start with. Abandonment. This is what we want to avoid. I know we all have that closet. If you've been working in special education for a while, every department has this closet that's just full of old technology that's not being used anymore. A lot of times it's broken. I love going through those closets though, because sometimes you find things like a Super Hawk, which I have not seen around in a while. AprilNet, I don't know, might have some, but it's not something that's commonly used as much anymore, those pre-iPad technologies. And some of them you can tell just had not been used for a while before they got put into that closet. So some of the research that came out on this started all the way back in the 90s, before we had computers that we could really carry around with us practically. Phillips and Zhao did some nice research saying that when people were evaluating for assistive technology, they were not considering what the user thought of the tech, how easy it was to get a hold of it, and how the device performed, and how the user's priorities might change, because we know our students grow and different classes have different tasks, they're different settings. And this is what they found in 1993. The Adams Project at UWM again looked at this in 2016, and what they found was kind of coming down to the device characteristics as well as the service provision, social aspects, personal factors, health, economic, and physical. A lot of these things carry over or can link to one another in different ways. If we're not considering the user's opinions or changes in their priorities, that's linking over to the social aspects and personal factors. We have to think about that device performance and procurement as well. An example of this is I worked in a high school where there was one-to-one technology, and just saying high school, I think kind of leads into the issue here, where students didn't want to look different. So if when doing an AT evaluation, I said, you know what, the A1 best tool for you to use is this, go forth and prosper, and they were really thinking in the back of your head, I'm not doing that, then it's definitely a factor leading towards abandonment of that device. In the same way, I worked in a very low income neighborhood where parents were saying, I'm not going to use that, because giving their student an iPad back in the year 2013 made their student a target on the street, meaning that they would be more likely to possibly be robbed or someone would come and steal that from them. So taking these factors into account can help with combating the eventual abandonment. And abandonment doesn't always have to look like that closet. It could be that you find that the device is covered in dust. It doesn't look like anyone's touched it or wiped it down in a while. It can look like, okay, you have devices that are consistently breaking. I know when working with iPads, especially as they've become more popular for AAC, I've started referring students to our BCBA and then also sitting down with the speech pathologist and saying, okay, are we looking at a behavior, or is this not the match for the student? Are they telling this isn't working for them? And I've seen this all the way from scanning pens to simple switches. If I have a student throwing a switch across the room, is it a behavior, or is it they're saying this is not the technology for me? So we have to take into account, where is that abandonment coming from, by looking at what it looks like. And of course, the direction we want to move in is looking at adoption. I think, especially in this field, we always have that person who sees the brand new thing coming out. They have it, they tweet about it, they podcast about it. I can't figure out Twitter. I'm going to be really honest. I'm probably the only, Zennial who does not figure these things out very easily. I also don't have Snapchat. But when a new iPhone comes out, I'm like, oh no, there's going to be problems with that. I'm going to wait. But we have those people who do jump in early and then have to problem solve through some of the things. Adoption has also been researched. Kinch and DePaula in 2002 gave this model just for a cycle of how assistive technology not is considered, which we're used to seeing, but how it is adopted. The selection phase with the trial and assessment, this is where we are typically doing our consideration. But beyond that, students do have to go through a learning phase where they understand operational and functional competencies of the device, moving into an integration phase where they can maybe be creative or problem solve a little bit when things are going wrong. And then finally into the development phase, what would you want this to do if it possibly could? And then coming back to selection. So a student really should be in this cycle of, I've learned the technology, I've gotten it into my coursework. Is it doing everything I want it to, in order to really come full circle to see the value in what they're doing? I've also seen this as one place where students with low incidence disabilities versus high incidence disabilities really do differ. I make a note here on the side, if a student needs it to exist, if I have a student who needs to use eye gaze, or there's no way they can access the game on the computer, they're going to be much more motivated to do that than the student who has other options, or maybe even someone enabling them in their environment and saying, oh, you know what, I'm going to touch what I think you're saying or looking at. There's ways that can be done correctly, but it also can keep students from fully adopting that the technology will be their helper or their way to access the environment. Kinch and DePaula also looked into, and this is why I was really happy with kind of the spread of people we have here today, what does successful adoption entail? And I summarize this within the school environment, that it should be the family, the student, and the teacher. And under teacher, I'm meaning paraprofessional, I'm meaning all of the therapists, meaning anyone in that school environment. And by breaking down what each person's role is, I like combining this with that implementation knowledge base from Quiet, just because I feel that it gives us a way to know, what can I do within my role? We know there aren't a lot of developers within the school environment, but these are people who are super accessible. If I find a new computer program, I will say, boom cards started last January. And yeah, one of the first, contacts I had with them before even purchasing was, hey, can you make these Switch accessible? Because I wanted to use them with my students in the low incidence population. So all of these, I think, can be put kind of in our job description when we're part of the team. And I like that the user has their factors as well. Having that high frustration tolerance, I think, is very important. Pride, desiring change. This is another thing with high schoolers. They might say, you know what, I'm getting C's, but I know I could get an A with that tool, but I don't really want to use it. So right there, you're not having a characteristic that you need. And it's not something that you can build extrinsically. You need that student to be intrinsic in their motivation. A lot of times I'd have parents say, well, can you make him use his text-to-speech software? And I'd say, this is my favorite thing to say, if I could make a 16-year-old do anything, I'd be patenting it, I'd be writing a book, I'd be on Oprah, she'd come out of retirement just for me, and all of these wonderful things would happen. But truly, having that motivation to change is something that we have to build within the student in a different way. I'm going to come up here. I do see something in the Q&A. Oh, great resource. Yay. I do love the Quiet. They have a hard copy published, which is wonderful. I did get it, and I keep telling myself I'm going to go collect autographs because I'm, that into assistive technology. But it's free on their website as well, along with other resources. So moving into how can we implement some of these things that we see in research either lead us away from abandonment or towards adoption. One thing that I'm a huge fan of, and it's not always the most practical, but I find it to be effective in building that student motivation, is considering a hierarchy. I like this statement that progress is not inevitable. It's up to us to create it. Even if a student understands whatever technology they've been given and they can show us how the technology works, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to keep going to the next step, to the next step, to the next step without our help. So, case study, I had a student who I really just adored this student. It's like, okay, you could be my niece because you're sassy and fun. But being sassy and fun also meant she didn't necessarily want to always do what we needed her to do. She was a student who, when she read with her eyes, was at about a 3rd grade reading level. When she pulled in some software to do the speech to text, text to speech, she was reading at a junior level and she was a freshman. So that was awesome. When she wrote her thoughts out, either by typing or on pen and paper, it was very disorganized. But when she could talk about it and go back and edit it with help, it was great. She was writing some pretty good stuff. And also calculator, she could organize a math problem, but she could not go through the steps. So there were definitely some gaps there. So these are the things we wanted her to use, and she wanted nothing to do with it. So what we did was we picked one thing. What one tool are we going to start with? And we chose text to speech because reading is super important in high school to learn other things. And we sat down with her and social worker actually, and she said what she didn't like about it was the voice was too robotic. And we went through all the voices and we had her rate them from least bad to most bad. We didn't even put good on there as an option because we wanted to give her some power in this. And then we had her, play with the voices, modulate them, see that she did have some control over it. We let her say, "This sucks." And I think that's sometimes an important thing, especially with an older student, is to let them know that you heard them. Now, we don't want them saying "this sucks" in the middle of math class because that would probably take up a lot of math class for some students. But we do want them to be able to express how they really feel so that they will come along on the journey with us. So then we started on speech to text. After she found a voice that was the least bad, she actually started using it a lot more. We moved on to speech to text, and she said she didn't like seeing all the errors on the screen. So we started with a hierarchy of, we want you to just record what you want your teacher to grade. You don't have to write it out or anything, just record it. Then we moved to, I'm going to put your computer where it's not facing you, and you're going to dictate. And we're not going to edit it. We're not going to look at it or anything. We're just going to submit it. And then it moved to, okay, we're going to turn it around and look at it. And you can see that there are errors there, but your teacher's not going to take off for those errors, but I want you to see them. And then we're going to go back and we're going to work on editing it. She got all the way to where she would do homework at home using her text to speech and then would edit it and turn it in. But how did we make this hierarchy work? We had to get a lot of buy-in from first the academic team saying, hey, we don't want her to go all the way down to like a D because she does have wonderful thoughts, but we need to put some modifications and additional accommodations in so that she can show us what she knows and learn how to use the tool and not feel punished as she's in the middle of that learning curve. It seemed to work pretty great for her, and we just took away modifications and accommodations as she was able to be more independent. So this is one thing I found success in with those students who really benefit from an assistive technology tool but are very against it. And by going through this, about a year later, she was like, oh yeah, I love this stuff. Why wouldn't I use it? And it's like, oh man, don't ever get in a time capsule and go see you from last year because we might have to start over again. But notice that tool, that team wasn't just one person. We got creative and brought in the social worker because she had some real emotional connections to doing this or not doing this. We also had the OT involved and the speech therapist and her teachers and her parents. So really getting that team approach and creating a hierarchy of, we're going to let you learn this, really helped this student. Another thing I found to be motivating for high school students is the other project that I mentioned, the quality indicators of assistive technology post-secondary. It's currently being revised, though what is here on the slide is definitely already available and will be until something new comes in. So don't worry, there won't be a gap. It's free. There are some resources with it. How this motivates high school students is once they turn 18, they lose their IEP team. They lose that person who's going to go and make sure all their accommodations are taken care of. They go to a place where the AT person probably won't get a referral to come and chat with them. They go to college and they have to do these things on their own. I did put at the very end of this presentation some studies showing differences between students who go to college knowing their assistive technology and students who either go to college never having learned assistive technology or not being very independent with it. So for high schoolers who are college bound, when we're looking at perhaps some of our high incidence students or students who are kind of at the upper edge of the low incidence range and are maybe doing different types of vocational programming, this tool can be a way to increase motivation because we want them to crave independence so that they use their tools to become independent. This all starts with the idea of consideration and feature matching. In Illinois, it is required by law that you do AT consideration at every IEP meeting, and actually that's an IDEA as well. Just in Illinois, they've added it into the school code just to kind of double check that everyone is doing it. And in a lot of meetings that I've been in, I worked contract, so I had the privilege of working in many different districts. But what I saw was in some IEP meetings, if there wasn't the knowledge around the table, it was kind of a script. Like, we considered assistive technology for your student and we decided that they didn't need it. Okay, there's our consideration. Or we considered assistive technology and we're going to use this tool that everybody can access. And sometimes that is completely fine for a student. However, if we don't take the time for that very small part of the IEP, it can leave a student kind of treading water for another year. Even though that AT box can be sometimes the quickest part of the IEP meeting that I'm in, I really feel that if once a year we're sitting down and taking consideration and feature matching a tool for a student, it could definitely be a lot longer part of the meeting or a lot longer part of the preparation. And I think justifiably so, because if we can find a tool that makes the student more independent, we're fulfilling more outcomes for them post-secondary, whether we're getting them this tool in first grade or getting them this tool junior year. So I really encourage teams, take more time for that. And I know that time is one of the many things, along with, Kleenex sometimes, that we don't necessarily have in classrooms. But to me, assistive technology is almost more important than the goals at times, because assistive technology is what a student will still be doing once the rest of the IEP team remains at school and the student moves on. So coming back to what are some of those things that give us positive outcomes with adoption? A student's age, we're probably going to see students who, honestly, I feel there's a sweet spot like at the end of primary school that lasts maybe until about 7th grade. That's just my personal opinion, where kids are still eager to please and they understand the technology and they're ready to get in. Younger, they probably need more help with the steps of the technology. Older, they might be a little jaded by that point. The student's disability is also going to come into play, whether they absolutely need that tool or if they can kind of get someone around them to maybe accomplish that task for them. And then motivation. At our transition center, we currently have a student who came to the OT last year and said, I just want to put my hair in a ponytail. She has spastic cerebral palsy and one arm works so much better than the other arm. And the OT went out and researched, and even though there are other AT tools that have been recommended for this student, the one that she worked at and mastered was putting up her hair, because that was super motivating to her. This is where I will come in and come to family too. I think that the expectations of the family are going to be important, because we know that if the parent sees the tool and thinks, oh, that's going to fix everything right away, that's a little bit unrealistic. And I think if they don't see that progress right away, it's really hard to not be disappointed or feel that something's not working or someone's not doing their job. I definitely have seen that. And I've had parents come and have honest conversations with me of, I thought this would work a lot faster. There's always the 2020 problem that I kind of joke about. I know more people are streaming than watching actual TV now, but they'll have something on like, oh, we have this miracle tool that all of a sudden helped this student with dyslexia and they're reading at a graduate school level. And yeah, that tool, when matched to the right student, after the student has been motivated and taken the time to learn the tool, absolutely, it's amazing. That's why we do this. But if that same tool that the parent saw on 2020 is not a match for their child, we're not going to see those same results. So I always tell parents, like, that's individualized to that kid on 2020, and that's awesome. And we'll see what we can do for your child. But there are other factors at play. Background of the family is also, as I said, important. Parents who are in lower income levels not only might be afraid of a student transporting technology, but they might be afraid of technology in the home, because no matter how many times I've said, we are legally obligated to give your student this tool, you're not going to have to pay for it if it breaks. Like, please don't go like run it over with your car, but also you're not going to be financially responsible. I think that families have shared with me that that fear is still there, that if they take it out of the backpack when it gets home, that an older brother, an older sister, a sibling, or even the student themselves could break it. Parents of differing educational backgrounds also seem to have different expectations about what the technology will do. So I think many times we come into the IEP meeting like, okay, we considered the technology. It's like, yeah, the school team did, but make sure the parents are on the same page as far as how much will it take to learn this and move forward with it. The staff as well. And when I say presentation, I don't mean training the staff how to use the tool. The way that the staff presents the tool to the student is going to make a huge difference. If it's something like a wheelchair, we know the physical therapist is going to be there involved. We know if it's an AAC device, the SLP is definitely going to be there. Different tools are going to have different team members kind of taking the lead. But if there are team members who kind of establish, well, we only work on this in therapy, or a classroom teacher might say, and we're not going to use that on this assignment. Just those things really stick with students. And I'm not saying that's things that people who are here, I think we're the choir here, kind of learning about the things that we can do. But as far as staff go, there sometimes is someone on the team that you might not suspect who might be giving the student a negative message about the tool. I know with Chrome extensions started becoming really popular in one of my buildings, the internet wasn't ready for that in our building. And, you know, teachers would be saying, oh, this is stupid. Oh, this is dumb. And the students were hearing that. So, oh, it's really difficult, but we have to figure out the way that we can present this to the student as, okay, sometimes it might work, but how do we get through that? That's frustrating. How do we problem solve? It's really hard to do in the moment, almost like wait time. Oh man, I have to like count seconds in my head for wait time. It's something I'm constantly working on. But being able to present that it's okay, we'll get through it, also takes a lot of kind of mental power on my part. And it's something the staff needs to learn in addition to other factors of the device. And then finally, that time and support. If a student can pick up the thing and there's 3 buttons on it, the thing, very technological AT term, and there's 3 buttons on it and they've got those buttons and they can take off and go, that means they've just started. They're kind of in that operational, I know how to make it go part of using a device. But that doesn't mean that we don't still offer support. Often people will say, oh, can we put in AT minutes? And my personal philosophy is I want to capacity build the team so they can teach the student in the moment. I can come in and teach them operationally. So carry over in generalization to being able to use it for homework, being able to use it within the classroom means getting the parent or the teacher or the paraprofessional or the therapist to also be providing that support. Which brings me to feature matching. This is something I know whether people are using the SET framework or a task demand model or other ways of looking at it, we have to identify what the student's weaknesses are, which we don't often talk about in the IEP, but they are important. If we don't know what's going on, we don't know what to accommodate, as well as their strengths, the instructional technology that is used within your school, what accommodations the student gets, and what modifications they get. I think all of these are very important in terms of coming down to what is the task that a student needs to do and what are the demands of that task that are difficult for the student. Instructional technology is something I always urge teams to look at because I service 11 districts right now, and those they may have programs that are in common. I don't think there's anything that truly overlaps across all 11 districts. We have some that are one-to-one with Microsoft Surface tablets. We have others that are one-to-one with iPads. We have others that are one-to-one with Chromebooks. We have others that are like one-to-what? So, and that's fine. That's regionally just what happens with our education system that I won't get into. But instructional technology is something to consider when you're feature matching. Is there something a student's already using universally that really works well for them? Make sure we're taking that into account with assistive technology, because I think in my area, you move half a mile to the east or half a mile to the west, that might not be available to the student. Models, oh, sorry, I got excited. There we go. Models of feature matching. I know that the SET framework is very popular within the school setting, and I'll even have teams saying, oh, we're going to do a SET. I'm like, yay. I like it. You're almost there. But I found for every student, that's not necessarily the end place that you want to end up at. Teams might use the SET framework to go through and start a conversation, though there are so many models out there. that really can give different insights depending on which model you use. The HAT, the Human Activity and Assistive Technology, is one that's used more in the rehabilitation and adult world, but it might be really great for considering how a student has physical access to their school environment. I did put MTSS up here, and even though it might be the multiple tiers of support within your school, those supports might include assistive technology that's both universally available or personally available. Even if a tool is universally available for that one student, it could be assistive technology that needs to be documented so they're aware of it and they know that when they go to another setting or a future setting that they will still need it. The Georgia Project for Assistive Technology has a worksheet that I have found my teachers really embrace because it really takes into account what accommodations and modifications are already in place, as well as considering could some of those accommodations be translated over to assistive technology. And the task demand model is one that I really get into. We use it in the course that I teach at UIC, where we say, okay, what's the task? And then this comes from some research from Eric Copenhaver, where it's going down and saying, what are the demands that come with that task? What does the student have to do physically? What do they have to do cognitively? What do they have to do communicatively? And it goes through all of these different areas. And you can blend these models. You can take maybe the task demand analysis and use it to help you with your set framework. I just encourage teams to kind of go beyond using one way of feature matching for all students. I also find this helps to build capacity because there are certain therapeutic groups that seem to like certain models better than others. So after pulling all of this together, isn't it fun to write an IEP and be on the team, because there's so much information and it's so important. Only done once a year. I think teachers really should get a whole day to write every IEP because it's a case study and there's a lot of info in it. And what we do to follow up from that, we have ways that we track goals. We have our benchmarks quarterly. We send home progress reports at the end of the semester. We send home what their grades are, and we can see reflections of different goals being addressed and how that's working. But how do we see if the assistive technology is working? I'll get to data collection in a moment, but since we don't typically have goals based around assistive technology because it doesn't necessarily fit into a framework of quarters and benchmarks for every student, we have to find a good way to write an implementation plan. And I do see, get a hand raise here. Let me see if I can. Oops, I'm learning how to use the panelist function. I do know there's a Q&A place to type. If you have a question, if you can use that, I'll see if I can get that answered for you. And I'll go into implementation plans. If I see that pop up, I'll come back to that. So as we go into an implementation plan, we need to make sure it's usable, meaning that it's possible to do, and that it's dynamic, because our first plan is not always the end-all be-all. There are some best practices which come from Quiet as well as from Ed Tech Points, another great resource on assistive technology. And it really kind of splits between what are our best practices, and I really always love reading through the common errors, because sometimes that could be helpful if figuring out what did we miss. Maybe that plan is not compatible with instruction. Okay, why isn't it working with the instruction that's happening for the student? What can we do to make it compatible? There's a student, we wanted to have a laptop. She wasn't getting her laptop out. We went and we did an observation in the class where she was never using it. It was one of those classrooms that had like too many desks in it. Maybe like desks have grown over the years. And I don't know about fire code or anything, but she was all the way in the corner and her desk really wasn't that big. The desktop wasn't a large surface. So within that classroom, within that setting, definitely we had to come up with another plan. And she was one of those kids who loved to sit in the back corner of the classroom. So putting her at a table near the front definitely wasn't an option. Definitely would have led to some abandonment there. So we had to find ways to adapt so that it could be compatible with the instruction so she felt comfortable using it during class. I see this a lot with vision too, where teachers say, how do I make everything visually accessible? And it's a lot more prep. And how do you kind of keep track of that and keep moving with it? You have to make a plan ahead of time to make it more compatible so that the teacher's feeling like it's something doable for them as well as something doable for the student. So these are nice and listed out here. And I know in an ideal world, we all have time to sit down and collaborate and integrate our plan, maybe going to every classroom and making sure the desk works. Some things I think are very realistic are shared responsibilities, using a variety of strategies, and having learning opportunities. And to me, that's definitely within different environments versus saying, okay, you're going to come to the very small room next to the boiler and we're going to talk about AT. It's saying we're going to have that integrated throughout your day. Data, I know, can sometimes be a little bit overwhelming, but there are some ways to make it a little easier, as well as managing the equipment and making sure it's up and working. So keeping these in mind as you write a plan is definitely a great place to start. I do want to go back and reemphasize that hierarchies can definitely be of use. Don't expect the student to come out of the gate having that technology mastered. I always love using wheelchairs as examples for staff because they can see a wheelchair. It's a very physical, concrete thing. It's not abstract in any way. And I might say, yeah, I'm not going to put little Johnny in the wheelchair and say, okay, drive down the hallway in the middle of a passing period with all of your peers who are tiny and might be squished. And then you have to go through doors and navigate to the elevator and how to get in it and out of it. We're going to take small steps with that student. So thinking about that with other tools as well, even something as small as a switch. Don't necessarily put it in front of the student and be like, touch it, and think that it's going to take off from there. So we have to find those small things. And even though I talked about task demand, that leads to task analysis. And what are those steps? Think about making your peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I still remember my first grade teacher putting peanut butter on her hand because we neglected to tell her about the bread. We need to think what parts are easy for the student, where will they need more support? And then involved parties, we need to make sure parents, teachers, therapists know how to use this. And I'm going to bring up the other very important group. I know we don't always have time to train the paraprofessionals. We need them to know where are we in the hierarchy, maybe give some agency to the paraprofessionals of saying, hey, they've mastered this step. I feel they're ready to move on to the next one. It's not something you have to be a rocket scientist to progress on. So I think it's very much somewhere that paraprofessionals can be great advocates for the students, as well as helping them to generalize in those areas. So how we put it out and how we plan to teach the tool will make a lot of difference. Implementation plans can be very detailed. And I know that's kind of irritating sometimes, but it's good to take that time on the front end and think of all those what ifs versus on the back end have a student without a tool. Because we want the students to have their tools, and parents have every right to come into the school and say, why haven't you been providing my student with this tool? So from a school aspect, we definitely want to make sure we're serving our student and staying within our legal boundaries and everything. But also it's going to ultimately lead to how the student does with their schoolwork. It puts everyone on the same page expectations-wise. If you purchase a tool that has a warranty and great repair, this is a favorite example of mine from another local AT coordinator. They bought a scanning pen from Sweden when they first came out and bought it through someone in the United States, and the scanning pen stopped working. Contacted the seller and they said, oh yeah, we can totally do that, but you have to send it here in Stockholm. So he got the address, he got permission from the district to take the PO card and pay in other country. I found PayPal is a great way to get around that, but got it in a box, went to the post office. They said, oh, it's got a lithium ion battery in it. You have to do this, you have to do this. So finally he got it packaged up off to Sweden. And it takes a while for things to get there. And it takes a while for things to get back. And when it came back saying address not found. So that was a bit of a bummer to the end of that story, but really putting the expectation out there to a parent that if a communication device breaks, one, you might have a loaner available, or you might not, because they're very expensive things to have, like 5 sitting in a closet. And two, the people who manufacture or work on these things, they're highly specialized devices. So it's not something that's going to be replaced or fixed necessarily within a 2 to 3 day time span. And I have found that if you are on the same page with how long that's going to take, it makes things much easier for the team to take a breath, use their low tech backups, maybe use more person-centered support until everything is back on track for the student. You can save yourself a lot of time on the back end by, I kind of call it low grade anxiety on the front end of saying what could happen. These are some of the tools broken down. I took this from Sokol in 2008. Talks about something called the tool belt therapy, or the tool belt theory. Yeah. It's another model that you can use for considering assistive technology. And these are the parts that were identified as important. Notice that equipment is right there. We also have to think about that student, their motivation, their learning. Are they a quick tech person, or are they going to need some more assistance? Within the school, how it will fit, the parents, and agreement on how you're collecting data. Some basic questions here. I made these next couple slides a little text heavy. I'm not necessarily going to read through all of it, but I think that these are important questions, so I wanted to highlight them. So if you're coming back and looking at the presentation or sharing information with someone else, you can kind of see what are all the things that came from Sokol without necessarily having to look it up today. But definitely knowing how the equipment will work, how it can be repaired, what will be the troubleshooting, and how it might be adapted or modified. Looking at the student, this is putting in a lot of who and where, talking about how much training they will need, when will that be provided? Will it be something that's integrated within the classroom to promote that generalization? Or, and this is something me personally as a speech therapist, when a student gets a communication device, I want individual minutes with that student, and I want minutes pushing into their classroom. And the reason for the individual is because when I'm in a classroom, me personally as a therapist, I don't like talking a lot while the teacher's talking. I think that's kind of my daughter of a teacher coming out a little bit, like I'm not supposed to be talking, they're talking. But I can give them direct and explicit instruction and modeling and teaching in a quiet environment where they aren't as distracted. But then when we go into the classroom, it's almost like we're doing the same thing, but I don't necessarily have to do as much talking, and the student is getting that generalization. That's a personal preference, but I find it's worked pretty well for me. Also looking at the school, what adults require training? This is where you cannot forget paraprofessionals. And I know that, oh man, I think that one thing that our model of schooling since last March has really emphasized is the amount of stuff we have available, which is great, but it also shows the amount of stuff that staff is expected to know and learn. It has had some positives that I think families now understand a lot of the software that's been used in schools much better. Not necessarily the way we would have wanted to teach everybody, but they have learned that. But just having multiple people on the team who can be that go-to, who can be the person to answer. Because if it's just the one instructional tech person in the building who knows how to turn on a feature and read and write, it's likely not going to get used. Whereas if multiple staff members have an idea, a teacher might feel more comfortable going next door and saying, hey, can you help me with this? Or a paraprofessional might say, hey, I know you worked with a student who did this. So building that network and building capacity, because it cannot be one person. Parents, I wrote this presentation for the first time before we started all of this fun stuff. But now video of use or demonstration, it's hard to schedule with parents. We can totally Zoom with them now, which I know it's hard to be excited about Zoom at this point. But we're using it now. Yay, love Zoom. It's allowing us so many more opportunities for training and learning. So hopefully that can help with some hands-on communication. Data. I'll go into this in a little bit more detail. Had to throw in my Star Trek joke. Typically my AT people totally get it. We know that the IEP does have guidelines for a lot of goals in data collection, but how do we do that with AT? Get into that a little more. If you need assistance outside of the IEP team, here are some resources. And back to the competencies, which I've reviewed a little bit. There are 4 key skills students need to feel competent with a device. Operational, how it's working. Social, being able to use it in context. Strategic, being able to problem solve. And functional, being able to just take off and use it. A lot of people have kind of looked at this idea of having competence with communication devices, with using assistive technology. So thinking about that as you build your hierarchies is going to be important. I go through and define these a little bit more. Operational, basically learning how to touch it, turn it on and off, and use it to complete your task. Functionally, that it's used for the task that it's chosen for. Some tools that can be used in different ways. Being strategic, how does it work in the real world? Because we know that what happens at the therapy table sometimes stays at the therapy table. It doesn't necessarily generalize. So we want to make sure that we're planning on how to do that. And finally, social, obtaining those skills and strategies so a student can explain to someone else how to help on this. I was at University of Illinois in 2002, and I will always remember this rainstorm because I'm running across the quad. In the middle of the quad, there's like this dip where you get a puddle, and there's a guy just trucking along in his power wheelchair. Chair dies right in the middle of the puddle. I look around. I'm like the only other person on the quad. I'm like, I gotta help this guy. At this point, I was not an AT person. I come over. I'm trying to help him out. We're not communicating very well. I push this wheelchair all the way to the union. We get there and he says, you know, there's a button you can flip that would make that a lot easier. So being able to develop that social competency so you can help other people with your AT as well. So I always like using that example because I just remember we were soaked, but we got that wheelchair out of the rain. Data collection, no data, no change. General rule of thumb. With assistive technology, it doesn't necessarily look like plus and minuses on a data sheet. We have objective data. If I see the student using it, student pulls it out in math class, cool, that's my check. There's some objective data for you. There are some softwares that have built-in programming. We can also look at a student's changing grades or how they are using other accommodations. Are they using them as frequently with the AT in place? I also really encourage the use of subjective data, especially with the students who are in high school and want to feel that agency within the process. What do you think of this? Make sure it's judgment-free. If a student tells you it sucks and they're not usually allowed to say sucks in class, let them have that conversation and that moment with you, because that's giving you a lot of information. See if their behavior changes and how the student feels when they're using the tool. Is it making things better? And then what do we do with that? There's features in Google Sheets where you can hit the Explore button and make a really pretty graph. They look awesome at IEP meetings, I will say that. It's something that I like to bring up and say, hey, even though it was subjective data, look how your child's feelings about using the device have changed. And if it goes negative, don't be afraid to revisit the AT cycle. I throw this in here because consideration and feature matching is so important as to whether a device will work and continue to work. This is a very basic version of it. We evaluate, make an action plan, implement, monitor, and keep going around. Students change. We know there's always new technology coming out, hence the Super Hawk that I discussed in the closet earlier. But we have to always be willing to change. This is where I'm a huge like IEP modifier. I know people don't necessarily like to do it a lot, but I will call a parent and say, you know what, I think if we tweak this, things will go well. And if not, we'll change it back. And parents have been pretty agreeable with that in my experience. Dan Cochran also used the Johns Hopkins University AT cycle to kind of discuss how we can break down into some smaller steps. AT at its heart is problem solving. I tell people I'm a problem solver. I look at a student, I say, hey, what's hard for you? And I say, can we solve that problem with technology, a tool, some accommodations, and we explore. I do kind of review some of the different models here as far as what can be used. Joy Zavala herself, she always will say it's a framework, not an evaluation. We want to make sure we're using a framework to look at what a student is doing. Yearly review, really think about it, is once a year kind of a, set IEP meeting enough, or the time that we have to look at it all the time? Is it a case manager responsibility? Is it a therapist responsibility? Think back to those indicators for implementation. Who can lead the team, but make sure there is a team. These are some lists of other ways that we can consider. I did include SAMR on here, which is really big in the instructional technology community and may allow you to have better conversations if you have someone with that role within your building. So just a quick review, thinking about implementation. You can do the best implementation plan that's ever seen the light of day, but if you don't have other quality areas of assistive technology coming in, it's not going to work. Administrative support. If your administrator doesn't support having a team approach, it's not going to work within an organization. You have to have someone at the table with the knowledge to say, okay, let's be able to make a good consideration and assess what the student needs. And it doesn't necessarily need to be an AT person. It could be a math teacher who has a tool that the case manager may never have heard of. We need to be able to evaluate and understand the importance that we only get these students until they graduate high school, and then they go from being under the laws of IDEA to the ADA, and they aren't going to have as much support. And then taking that time for professional development and training. And I know there are so many initiatives. I sit next to the SEL coordinator for our cooperative and the BCBA, and I'm glad we like each other because we could really fight about who gets training time. So all of these things really do feed into how well will things be adopted or abandoned. I do have a wealth of sources here, and this is kind of my Easter egg. Just a positive outcome of adoption. Ben Satterfield down in Georgia, really great guy. If you want to catch up with him at any time, he did this research study where students who went from high school to post-secondary, students with high incidence disabilities, those who mastered their AT in high school, their GPA stayed steady or went up in 88% of cases. The students who did not master it, we saw that go down because the demands within the collegiate environment are so different. So I like to point this out as another way that we can build that intrinsic motivation, pull our teams together, write a good implementation plan, and hopefully increase the chances that that device doesn't end up in our closet or dusty on a shelf. So, wow, it's exactly noon. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. If there are any questions, I'm going to check in there. Very happy if you would like to email me or reach out. I'm always happy to discuss assistive technology. I see something in the chat here. All right. Love Star Trek. Oh, sorry, I missed that one. All right, thank you. I'm glad. I hope this is very beneficial to you. Thank you.
All right, I don't see any questions right now. So thank you so much for all of this great information, Sayard. And thanks to everyone for taking time out of your day to attend. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.